Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something that still makes my hands tremble when I think about it. This isn't one of those stories you forget when the video ends. It's the kind that crawls into your mind and refuses to leave. You probably won't survive this story without questioning your own family a little. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to watch the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's comfortably embark on tonight's journey. It started on one of those humid afternoons when the air feels heavy enough to remember things for you. I was cleaning out my mother's old house after she passed away 6 months earlier. The house sat on the edge of a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where curtains never move and everyone somehow knows when you've had an argument. I'd been avoiding this day because, honestly, going through her things felt like trespassing. She was one of those mothers who hid her thoughts inside perfectly folded linens and polished silverware drawers. I remember kneeling beside her old vanity dust coating my jeans when I noticed the faint creak beneath the rug. I'd stepped on that spot 100 times before, but this time the sound felt sharper, like the house was whispering something urgent. I pulled the rug back, and there it was, a small, uneven floorboard with a thin crack running across it. My heart did that stupid, quick thump that happens when curiosity suddenly feels dangerous. I pressed my fingers against the edge and pried it up. Beneath the board lay a tiny compartment, and inside it, a brass key tied with a frayed red ribbon. It wasn't shiny. It looked ancient, tarnished by years of silence. My first thought was that it probably opened one of the old trunks in the attic. But then I saw the small piece of paper underneath folded neatly as if placed there on purpose. It wasn't a note, just a torn corner of stationery with the faint scent of lavender, her perfume. That's when I knew she'd meant for me to find it someday. Or maybe for someone else. You know how families work. Everyone hides something, but mothers hide best. Psychologists say most people underestimate how much their parents have lived before them. I guess I was about to find out just how much. I pocketed the key and looked around the room, suddenly suspicious of everything that had once felt safe. It's strange how a single object can make an entire room feel like a lie. I went through every drawer, every cupboard, searching for something that might fit. Nothing. Then my eyes landed on her dresser, the same one she used every morning for 40 years. The top drawer opened easily, the second was stiff, but the third one refused to budge. My pulse quickened. I crouched, held the key in my hand, and felt a weird static crawl up my arm. It slid in smoothly like it had been waiting. The click it made wasn't loud, but it echoed inside my chest. Inside, I found a stack of letters tied with another red ribbon, this one brighter, newer. The handwriting on the envelopes wasn't hers. It was bold, slanted, unmistakably male. I shouldn't have opened them, but curiosity doesn't wait for permission. The first letter began with, "My dearest Marianne." I kept the promise to stay away, but not forever. My mother's name. My hand shook so hard I almost tore the paper. There were photos, 2 black and white, fading at the edges. One of them showed her standing beside a man I'd never seen before. He had that confident, half-smiling look that people used to have before they learned how to fake happiness. In the background, I could see our family car, which meant the photo wasn't ancient. It was recent enough that someone had been keeping this alive long after I was born. I sat on the floor for what felt like hours, the letters scattered around me like evidence. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. It's funny, when you lose someone, you think the worst pain is their absence. But finding a secret, that's worse, because it makes you question if you ever really knew them at all. There's a strange cultural superstition my grandmother used to whisper, never keep keys that open to the dead's secrets. She believed that spirits cling to the last person who touches their mysteries. I used to laugh at that. But that night, I put the key on my nightstand, and I swear every time I closed my eyes, I could hear the faint creak of the floorboard again. The next morning, I told myself it was all just grief, making me dramatic. But still, I took the key with me everywhere. People still debate whether objects can hold emotional energy. Some say it's nonsense, others swear they've felt it. All I know is that little brass key seemed to hum whenever I touched it. I didn't realize yet that what it opened wasn't just a drawer, but the beginning of something that would undo every story I'd ever been told about my family. The next morning, sunlight poured through the lace curtains like someone had left the world half open. I woke up with the key in my hand, which was strange because I was sure I'd left it on the nightstand. That's grief, right? You start sleepwalking through memories, touching things you wish could talk back. I made myself some coffee black and burnt the way my mother used to drink it and tried to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. But the key was warm, too warm, like it had been held. I spread the letters across the dining table, careful not to smudge the old ink. Each envelope was dated between 1989 and 1995 years, when my mother had supposedly been single and working 2 jobs. The handwriting changed over time, at first gentle, then hurried, then desperate. I started reading them in order. The man wrote about things that didn't add up, meeting secretly by the docks, planning to move to Alder Street when it's safe, and his longing to see the child. That last line hit me so hard I stopped breathing for a second. The child. He mentioned a name I didn't recognize, Samuel. He wrote, "You promise to keep Samuel safe even if it means erasing me." I froze. There was no Samuel in our family, no cousin, no half-uncle, nothing. Just me and my brother Daniel. Unless... I picked up the photo again. The man beside my mother had the same chin dimple Daniel had. My stomach flipped. I don't know if it was horror or jealousy, but the thought that my brother might not share my father's blood sent a cold thread of electricity through me. People always talk about family and bloodlines, but family is really just a long, complicated agreement to keep each other's lies consistent. At first, I thought I should tell Daniel. He was always the calm one, the rational one. He'd laugh it off, tell me I was overreacting, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he'd been avoiding the house since Mom's death, or how he hadn't cried at her funeral, just clenched his jaw and stared at the coffin like it had wronged him. I needed proof. That's how I ended up at the local photo studio. The sign outside still said Photo Express, even though no one uses film anymore. The owner, a gray-haired man with a gentle smile, offered to restore the photo for me. When he looked at it, his smile faded. He squinted, then asked, "Where did you get this?" I told him it was from an old drawer in my mother's house. He hesitated before saying, "I think I've seen this man recently. Comes around the market on Saturdays." Same face, just older. My throat went dry. I asked if he was sure, and he nodded. Hard to forget a face like that. He used to come in for film roles years ago. Always paid cash. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying his words, hearing them like echoes through the walls. If that man was still alive, it meant my mother had been in contact with him long after she told us he'd died. She'd lied. And maybe not just about him. I took the photo and the letters back to my mother's bedroom. I stared at her dresser, the one that now looked more like a vault than furniture, and wondered what else it might be hiding. I found a false bottom in one of the smaller drawers lined with velvet. Inside was a small brooch shaped like a willow leaf, the kind she always wore on her lapel. I flipped it over and saw something engraved, AS plus MC always. The initials matched the letters. AS, that had to be the man. MC Marianne Carter, my mother's maiden name. I Googled Alder Street and my city's name. It wasn't far, about a 15-minute drive. I recognized it vaguely, an old neighborhood that used to be beautiful before the factories closed. My hands were shaking as I scribbled the address on a sticky note. I didn't know what I'd find, but whatever it was, I couldn't stop myself. That evening, my father called. We hadn't spoken much since the funeral. He asked if I'd gone through Mom's things yet. When I said yes, there was a pause. Then he asked, "You didn't find anything unusual, did you?" His voice was too casual, the way people sound when they already know the answer. I said no. I don't know why I lied. Maybe because I didn't trust him anymore. He'd always been kind, but distant, the type of man who apologized without explaining what for. For the first time, I wondered if he'd known about the man in the photo, if Daniel's face made him wince, because it reminded him of someone else. That's the strange part about grief. It doesn't just make you miss people, it makes you start investigating them. Like their death was the last puzzle they left behind. Family therapists say this happens often, especially when the deceased was the emotional keeper of the house, the one who knew where all the stories were buried. My mother had been exactly that. At one point, I laughed out loud, partly to break the tension. "Who hides a key under a floorboard and thinks it's normal?" I said to no one. It's weird how humor slips out during fear. It's your brain's way of pretending you're in control. I made 3 jokes that night, all terrible. One about needing a loyalty test for families, one about a Netflix series called My Mom's Secret Key, and one about charging rent to the ghosts living in my walls. None of them made me feel better. Before bed, I put everything back in the drawer and locked it again. This time, I hid the key in my jacket pocket. If my mother could keep a secret this long, I could keep one night to figure out what it meant. I remember staring at the ceiling, thinking about that word, Samuel. Who was he if he existed? Where was he now? People still debate whether fate is just coincidence in disguise. But I swear something was pulling me forward. Like the story wasn't done with me yet. At 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of the front door creaking open. Not a loud sound, just enough to make my skin tighten. I grabbed my phone and tiptoed down the hall. The house was dark, but I saw a sliver of movement near the living room, someone's shadow. I froze. Then I realized it wasn't a person. The wind had blown the door ajar. Still, before closing it, I noticed something on the doormat, a folded newspaper clipping, yellowed and fragile. It was an obituary from 1995. The headline read, "Local man presumed dead in dock explosion, body never found." The name beneath it, Andrew Sloan, the same initials from the brooch. My breath caught in my throat. The man in the photo wasn't dead. He just disappeared. And somehow someone wanted me to know that. I locked the door, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it echo. The key felt heavier in my pocket, like it knew it had just unlocked something far bigger than I could handle. I didn't tell anyone about the obituary. Not Daniel, not my father, not even my best friend Lila, who could usually drag secrets out of me with a glass of wine and 10 minutes of silence. It didn't feel like something to share, yet it felt like something to survive. The next morning, I drove to Alder Street. The closer I got, the more the world seemed to peel back into a different decade. Paint peeled from the houses like sunburnt skin, and broken bicycles rusted in the grass. The address from the letter led to number 46, a narrow 2-story house with boarded windows and ivy choking the porch rails. I parked and stepped out, half expecting someone to stop me, half hoping someone would. But the street was silent except for the buzz of a distant lawnmower. The door was locked, but the back entrance had a shattered window, large enough for a hand to fit through. I reached in, turned the handle, and pushed the door open. The smell of dust, mildew, and something sweetly rotten hit me all at once. Inside, time had stopped. There were dishes still in the sink, a half-open jar of jam fossilized on the counter, and on the wall a faded photo of a woman and 2 children. One of the kids looked exactly like me at age 7, same hair, same uncertain half-smile. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over a chair. How could my face be on a stranger's wall? I walked through the room slowly, the floorboards complaining under my weight. Upstairs, I found a bedroom covered in old newspapers. In the corner, a dusty trunk sat half open. Inside were folded clothes, a stack of notebooks, and a single envelope addressed to Marianne. The handwriting was the same as in the letters I'd found in my mother's drawer, but this one was sealed. I hesitated only for a moment before opening it. The letter was brief, too brief to breathe properly while reading it. Marianne, if you're reading this, it means you finally told her. I hope you did it gently. She deserves the truth more than anyone. Don't let him bury this again. You know what he's capable of. A. I stared at the page until the letters blurred. She deserves the truth. Who was she? Was it me? Was it someone else? And who was the him who needed to be stopped, my father, or someone worse? I took a photo of the letter with my phone, folded it carefully, and slipped it into my bag. Something about the way it was hidden made me sure I wasn't supposed to find it. As I turned to leave, I noticed something else, a faint carving on the doorframe right at eye level. It was my mother's handwriting, no doubt. The words were simple, "Forgive me." I left the house trembling. My hands were shaking so badly that when I unlocked my car, the alarm chirped twice like it was mocking me. I sat there for several minutes, staring at the dashboard. Psychologists say that when faced with overwhelming truth, the brain sometimes invents alternate explanations to protect itself. I was trying to invent one, but there was no story that made sense of what I'd seen. Back home, I made tea I didn't drink and called Daniel. He sounded distracted, like he was pretending not to be awake. I asked him if he remembered any family connection to someone named Andrew Sloan. There was a pause. Then he said, "Why are you asking about him?" The way he said him, tight, defensive, made my stomach drop. I told him the truth, that I'd found letters, photos, the obituary. There was a long silence on the line, then he sighed. "I told Dad we should have burned those things years ago. I almost dropped the phone." "You knew I knew enough," he said quietly. "Mom told me before she died that you didn't need to know. It was her decision." My throat tightened. "Know what, Daniel?" "That our mother had another family, that our father isn't who he says he is, that there's some man who might still be alive." He exhaled sharply. "It's not what you think. Look, just don't go digging any deeper, okay? Some doors should stay closed." I hung up before he could say more. That phrase, "some doors should stay closed," sounded like something my father had said once about family arguments. Better to shut the door than to let the neighbors hear. I remember thinking it was just about privacy. Now it felt like a confession. That night I dreamed of the house on Alder Street again, but this time the carving said something different. "You're next." I woke up drenched in sweat. Dreams like that don't fade, they leave fingerprints on your mind. The next day I went to the library archives, a quiet corner of the city that still smelled of paper and rain. I asked the clerk to help me look up any records on Andrew Sloan. She found a few: an old property deed for the house on Alder Street, a business license for a carpentry shop, and a marriage certificate. My pulse quickened when I saw the bride's name, Marianne Carter. My mother. I felt dizzy. The date on the certificate was 1988, 2 years before she married my father, which meant she'd already been married when she met him. I rubbed my temples and laughed under my breath. "Of course, Mom. You always said you hated big weddings." Here's a fact about mainstream family dynamics. Psychologists estimate that 1 in 5 families hides a major secret, usually about money or relationships, from at least one member. People like to think their families are normal, but normal is just a polite way of saying well-rehearsed. I made copies of everything and drove home, my mind spinning so fast I nearly missed a red light. When I got back, the key was gone from my jacket pocket. I tore through the house looking for it. Then I found it sitting neatly on my mother's vanity, exactly where I'd first discovered it days ago. I laughed again, a sharp sound that didn't sound like me. "Okay," I muttered. "You win, Mom. I'm listening." That night, I locked all the doors and windows, not because I was scared of anyone outside, but because I wasn't sure what was inside anymore. I sat in the dark living room, flipping through the letters again, and noticed something I'd missed before: faint indents on the back of one envelope, as if someone had written over it and the pressure left marks. I shaded over it with a pencil. The message read, "Meet me at the Willow. The Willow." In our backyard, there was an old willow tree where my mother used to sit and read on summer evenings. She called it her thinking place. I hadn't gone near it since the funeral. I went outside with a flashlight. The grass was overgrown, the air heavy with the smell of damp soil. I circled the tree, feeling ridiculous, until I saw the ground slightly raised near the roots. I knelt, dug with my hands, and hit something solid. It was a small tin box, rusted shut. I pried it open and gasped. Inside were more photographs: my mother, Andrew, and 2 children. One was clearly Daniel. The other was me. Except it wasn't. The girl in the photo had my face, my eyes, my hair, but a small birthmark on her neck I didn't have. Written on the back was a single word: Samuel. I dropped the photograph. It fluttered to the ground like a dead leaf landing face down on the damp earth. For a moment, I just knelt there, hands covered in mud, heart racing so hard it felt like my ribs might crack. The flashlight beam trembled across the ground, catching fragments of faces, dates, and water-damaged paper inside the tin box. My brain tried to compute what I was seeing: 2 children who looked identical except for one small difference. Samuel. The name from the letters. The one my mother swore never existed. I picked up the photo again, brushing off the dirt. The handwriting on the back was hers without question. She'd written that name like she'd written every grocery list and birthday card steady looping patient. I whispered it out loud as if saying it might make the ghost real. Samuel. The air seemed to shift, the leaves of the willow shivering like they were listening. I carried the box inside, careful not to look at the dark windows. You ever notice how glass reflects just enough to make you doubt what's behind you? I put the box on the kitchen table, washed my hands, then stood there staring at it like it might start talking. The box contained more than photos: a hospital bracelet, 2 baby footprints stamped in faded ink, and a folded hospital release form dated 1990, the year I was born. Except the name on it wasn't mine. Samuel Carter Sloan, male, born April 6th. My birthday was April 6th. My body went cold. I opened the document again as if maybe I'd misread it. But there it was in ink that hadn't faded at all, the doctor's signature, the same hospital I was supposedly born in the same day. I checked my birth certificate in the file drawer where my mother used to keep all our documents. The date matched. The hospital matched. But my name was Hannah Carter. The thought hit me like falling backward in water. You can't breathe, you can't think, and everything's loud but muffled. People still debate whether identity is something you build or something you inherit. In that moment, I wasn't sure I had either. Was I Samuel? Was Samuel me? Was there another child, a twin maybe, who didn't make it, or had something darker happened? I grabbed my phone and called Daniel again. He didn't answer. I left a message, half panicked, half angry. I found the willow box. I found him. I found me. Call me back or I'm going to Dad. He didn't call back. Instead, I got a text from an unknown number an hour later. Stop digging, Hannah. It's not what you think. I felt every hair on my arms rise. No name, no punctuation, just that sentence. I didn't reply. I turned off my phone, locked the front door, and sat in the living room with the box beside me, trying to remember every detail of my childhood. It's strange when you try to recall your own past, you start noticing things that never made sense before, like how there were no baby pictures of me younger than 6 months, or how Mom always hesitated when people said Daniel and I looked nothing alike, or how she'd flinch whenever anyone mentioned twins like the word itself carried voltage. That night I dreamed again, but it wasn't the usual chaos dreams. This one felt deliberate. I was standing under the willow tree, the soil soft and black beneath my bare feet. My mother was there, sitting on her wooden chair, smiling, her hair pinned up like she always wore it when she baked. She said one thing clear as day: you were never supposed to find the key. Then she vanished. I woke up crying. Not the loud kind of crying, but the silent shaking kind that feels like a heartbeat you can't stop. I don't know if it was grief, fear, or both. Maybe it doesn't matter. People always say truth sets you free, but they forget to mention it burns everything on its way out. By morning, I decided to confront my father. I drove to his house on the other side of town, the key in my jacket pocket, the tin box on the passenger seat. When he opened the door, he looked older than I remembered, his face sunken and gray. He smiled weakly. "Hannah," he said, but his eyes darted immediately to the box in my hand. "You found it." That single sentence told me everything. I stepped inside, heart hammering. "So you knew," he sighed, motioning me to sit. "I hoped you never would. Your mother wanted to keep you safe from what I snapped. A name, a key. From me." He rubbed his temples the way he always did when we fought. "You were born during a time when your mother was confused. She'd lost someone. She couldn't bear to lose another. Samuel was your twin, but he didn't survive. She couldn't accept it. For months, she kept calling you by his name. When she finally recovered, she swore never to speak of it again. I felt dizzy. That's not what this says." I pulled out the hospital form, thrust it toward him. "This says he was released, that he lived." He looked at it, and for the first time, his composure cracked. His jaw tightened, eyes narrowing like he was seeing something he'd buried long ago. "That's impossible," he muttered. "We buried him. I saw the body." I whispered, "Are you sure it was him?" He didn't answer. The silence stretched so long that I could hear the clock ticking behind him, each second punching the air. He finally said, "Your mother changed after that day. She wouldn't let me near the paperwork. She kept that key with her always. I thought it was guilt, but maybe—" He trailed off. I pressed. "Maybe what? Maybe she switched you," he said quietly. "Maybe Samuel lived and you—" He stopped shaking his head. "No, that's crazy." I stood up my chair, scraping against the floor. "No, it's not. Not if she thought you'd take him away." He looked up sharply. "You think I'd hurt my own child? I don't know what to think anymore," I whispered. He reached for the box, but I pulled it back. That's when I saw it, the way his hand trembled not from age, but from recognition. He knew that box. He'd seen it before. I left without another word. When I got home, the front door was ajar. My stomach dropped. I walked in cautiously, scanning the rooms. Nothing seemed stolen, but on the kitchen table the tin box was open again, and the photo of Samuel was missing. In its place lay a folded note. I unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was rough mail, almost identical to the letters from Andrew Sloan. The message read, "You found my key. Now find me." My hands went cold. There was no signature, but it didn't need one. The ghost from my mother's past wasn't just real, he was here, somewhere close. I sat down, clutching the note, and for the first time since this began, I realized something terrifying. The key didn't open the past. It was opening the present one lock at a time. I didn't sleep that night. Every small creak in the house felt deliberate, like footsteps pausing just before the door. My mind replayed the words on that note. "You found my key. Now find me." I kept trying to tell myself it was some cruel prank, that maybe Daniel had written it trying to scare me into dropping this. But deep down, I knew that handwriting. I'd seen it on every letter hidden beneath my mother's floorboard. It was Andrew's. And if he was alive, that meant my mother had been lying until the day she died. By sunrise, I'd packed a small bag camera, phone charger, pepper spray, and the key. I didn't know where I was going, but the words "find me" echoed in my head like a command. My first stop was the docks, the same place mentioned in Andrew's old letters. The drive there felt unreal, like watching my own life from outside the window. The docks were mostly abandoned now. Rusted cranes stood like skeletons over a stretch of cracked concrete. The air smelled like salt oil and old secrets. I parked near an empty warehouse, its sign, half-fallen letters faded into Marna Supel S. I wandered inside. Sunlight leaked through broken windows in sharp golden beams. The dust sparkled in the air like static. Something about the place felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by memories that refused to die. I ran my fingers along the wall and found a mark carved into the wood, a small circle with a line through it, the same symbol I'd seen on one of the old envelopes. A chill ran through me. This was one of their places. I took a few steps further in and saw a figure standing near the far end of the dock. My heart jumped to my throat. For a second, I thought it was Andrew. He was tall, wearing a dark coat, and turned away from me, watching the water. I called out, "Hello?" and the echo came back lonely and hollow. The man turned slightly, and my breath caught. It wasn't Andrew. It was Daniel. "What the hell are you doing here?" I shouted, half in fear, half in relief. He didn't answer right away. His eyes darted to the key hanging from my necklace. "I told you to stop digging, Hannah. Then tell me the truth," I said. "Who sent that note?" "Who's Andrew Sloan?" Daniel looked away, jaw tight. "You really don't get it, do you? None of this was supposed to be your problem. Mom didn't want you involved. Stop saying that," I snapped. "I'm involved whether I want to be or not. He's alive, Daniel." He left me a note. He closed his eyes like the words hurt. "He's not alive," he said finally. "Not in the way you think. What does that even mean?" He took a deep breath, his voice trembling. "After Mom died, Dad made me destroy everything, letters, photos, documents. But one night I couldn't. I opened one of the envelopes, and inside was a confession. Andrew wasn't just Mom's lover, he was her first husband, and he wasn't dead. He disappeared after threatening to expose Dad's business deals with the shipping company. There was an explosion that night, yes, but no one ever found his body. So you're saying Dad's involved in this?" Daniel hesitated. "I'm saying our family didn't just bury secrets, they buried people." My stomach turned. I took a step back, clutching the key. Then what's this key for? Why send me messages? He ran his hand over his face. Because he thinks you're Samuel. The silence after that was deafening. The wind whistled through the broken glass, a mournful sound that made my eyes sting. What did you just say? He thinks you're your brother, Daniel said quietly. Mom told him Samuel lived, that she'd hidden him. She switched your hospital files to protect you from Dad, but Andrew never knew. He's been looking for you ever since. The letters, the clues, they weren't meant for Hannah. They were meant for Samuel. I felt my knees go weak. So he doesn't even know I exist, Daniel shook his head. He knows now. You've been leaving a trail. Every search, every visit, it's like ringing a bell. Before I could respond, we heard a sound, a car door slamming outside. Daniel's face went pale. He grabbed my arm. We have to go. We ran toward the side exit, but a voice called out from behind us, calm and low. Leaving so soon, I turned. A man stepped out of the shadow, his face partly hidden by the light behind him. I couldn't breathe. It was him, the man from the photographs, older, now his hair silver at the temples, but his eyes unmistakable. Andrew Sloan. "Hello, Samuel," he said softly. I froze. My mind screamed to correct him, to tell him I wasn't Samuel, but the words died in my throat. Daniel stepped in front of me, his voice steady. "You shouldn't be here, Andrew. This ended decades ago." Andrew smiled faintly. "Ended? You mean you ended it, don't you? Your father made sure of that, but I'm not here for him. I just want what's mine." He looked directly at me, his gaze sharp and almost tender. "Your mother promised you'd come find me one day." My pulse pounded in my ears. "She's gone," I said quietly. "She never told me about you." His expression softened, almost sad. "She couldn't. Your father made sure of that." He took a step closer and Daniel tensed. "I don't want trouble. I just need the documents she hid. The key opens a safe deposit box at the old city bank. Inside is the proof of everything your father did and why your mother was running from him." Daniel shook his head. "You're lying. You're manipulating her." Andrew sighed. "Maybe. Or maybe you're still protecting the man who destroyed our lives." The two of them stared at each other, silent but dangerous. And I stood there, between them, my heart splitting in two directions. Finally, I whispered, "What's in the box?" Andrew looked at me. "The truth about who you are." That was all it took. My knees nearly gave out, but I forced myself to stay upright. "Then show me." He nodded once. "Tomorrow, 10 o'clock, the old city bank. Come alone." Then he turned and walked away, his coat flaring behind him like the final page of a book I didn't remember reading. When I looked back, Daniel was gone too. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. The city blurred past in streaks of gray and gold. For the first time, I wasn't sure who to trust, or if I was even the person I thought I was. That night, I sat by the window watching the moonlight spill across the floor. I thought about my mother, her secrets, her gentle voice when she'd say, "One day you'll understand why I kept things quiet." People still debate whether the truth heals or destroys. I think it does both. It just depends how much of yourself you're willing to lose in the process. Tomorrow, I was going to open that box. And for better or worse, I knew my life would never close again. Morning came heavy, like the air itself didn't want to move. I didn't sleep at all. My mind kept looping through everything Andrew had said. The safe deposit box, the documents, the truth about who I was. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the key lying in my palm. It looked smaller now, almost innocent. It's strange how something so tiny can carry so much weight. At 9:30, I left the house. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. My phone buzzed with 2 missed calls from Daniel, but I didn't answer. The drive to the old city bank took less than 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. The building was a relic, marble columns, brass handles, and that eerie stillness of a place built to guard secrets. Inside the lobby smelled faintly of dust and money. A woman at the front desk looked up when I entered, her eyes flicking to the key around my neck. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I have a deposit box to access," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She guided me to a small room lined with safety boxes, handed me a clipboard to sign, and disappeared behind a door. My hand shook as I found the matching number 41 scene. The brass was worn like it had been touched 1,000 times by someone who never got what they were looking for. I slid the key in. It turned with a satisfying click. Inside was a single brown envelope, thick and tied with a black string. My name was written across it in my mother's handwriting for Hannah. My breath caught. Not Samuel. Hannah. For a moment, I just stared at it, afraid to open it, afraid that maybe everything would make sense and that I wouldn't like what it meant. I pulled the string loose and unfolded the papers. Inside were photographs, legal documents, and one letter addressed simply, "My daughter." I read it slowly, each word heavier than the one before, "My Hannah." If you're reading this, it means I failed to protect you from the past. There was never supposed to be a choice between you and your brother, but there was. When you were born, your twin wasn't breathing. I thought he was gone. Your father blamed me for everything. Then Andrew came back. He said he could help. He told me Samuel had lived, that he'd taken him away that night because your father planned to claim only one child for the inheritance. He begged me to run, but I couldn't. So I stayed, and I lied. I changed names, changed papers, changed everything. You grew up safe, but not free. If you ever find Andrew, don't hate him. He wanted to love you both, but the law, the money, and the shame twisted everything. The truth you'll find in these papers will set you free, but it might destroy everyone else. Remember the willow tree. Underneath it, I buried the part of me that couldn't live with the truth. I hope you forgive me. Love always, Mom. I couldn't breathe. I clutched the letter against my chest, trying to stop the trembling. The papers beneath it were proof birth certificates, bank statements, a deed showing that Andrew Sloan co-owned our family home before my father ever entered the picture. And tucked at the very bottom, DNA test results dated just before my mother's death. The names listed Hannah Carter, child, Andrew Sloan, biological father. My heart stopped. I read the line 3 times before it sank in. Andrew wasn't just my mother's first husband. He was my father. I dropped the envelope, the papers spilling across the marble floor. Somewhere in the building, a door slammed, making me jump. When I turned, Andrew was standing in the doorway. He looked exhausted, older than he had yesterday, but his eyes softened when they met mine. "I see you found it," he said quietly. My throat felt dry. "You knew." He nodded slowly. "I knew she'd tell you this way. Your mother couldn't face you. She thought keeping me out of your life was safer." Tears stung my eyes. "You let me grow up thinking another man was my father." He stepped closer, his voice shaking. "I didn't have a choice. She begged me to disappear. Your father threatened to ruin us both if I ever came near you." I shook my head, backing away. "No, you don't get to blame her. You both lied." He didn't argue. He just looked at me, eyes full of something between guilt and love. "You're right," he said softly, "but you're the only one who can make it right now. Those papers prove what your father did, embezzlement, fraud, falsifying death records. He used your mother to cover his crimes. That's why she hid the key." I stared at him, stunned. "You want me to expose him? I want you to choose," he said. "Truth or peace?" Before I could answer, I heard footsteps behind me. "Daniel!" He burst into the room, face pale and furious. "What the hell are you doing, Hannah?" He saw the papers on the floor and froze. His eyes darted between me and Andrew. "You don't believe him, do you? He's lying." Andrew's voice was calm. "You knew the truth already. That's why your father made you destroy everything." Daniel's hands shook. "You don't understand. If this comes out, everything's gone. Dad's company, the estate, our names. Mom wanted to protect that." I held up the DNA test. "No, Daniel, she wanted to protect me." He lunged forward to grab it, but Andrew stepped between us. "Enough!" His voice cut through the air like a blade. "Let her decide." I looked at them both, the brother I'd grown up with, the man who'd turned out to be my real father, and realized there was no choice that didn't end in ruin. If I exposed the truth, I'd destroy the only family I'd ever known. If I buried it again, I'd live the rest of my life knowing it was built on a lie. People still debate whether justice and forgiveness can coexist. I think the answer depends on how much of your soul you're willing to trade. I gathered the papers, tucked them back into the envelope, and whispered, "I need time." Daniel glared at Andrew. "If you ever come near her again, I'll—" Andrew cut him off. "You'll what?" Pretend she's not your sister." Daniel flinched but didn't reply. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the sound echoed off the marble walls. Andrew watched him go, then turned back to me. "Whatever you decide, make sure it's yours. Not his, not your father's, not mine." I nodded slowly. "I will." He smiled faintly, sadness softening his features. "You have your mother's courage." Then he left, just like that, disappearing into the sunlight outside. I sat there for a long time staring at the letter. The world felt both clearer and more broken than before. The key lay beside me, cold and silent now, as if its purpose had been fulfilled. When I finally stood to leave, I looked back at the empty room and whispered, "You were right, Mom." The truth did set me free, but I don't know if I can survive it. I drove home in silence. The world outside felt unfamiliar, like I was moving through a painting that no longer belonged to me. Every traffic light, every storefront, every tree-lined street carried a strange detachment, like the city had been repainted overnight but in duller colors. I wasn't Hannah Carter, not really. I wasn't even sure if I was Samuel. I was just someone in between, someone my mother had sculpted out of fear and love and lies. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw my father's car parked outside. I froze. He hadn't been here in months. The curtains of the living room moved slightly, and I knew he'd been waiting. For me. The envelope felt like a brick of fire in my hands. My instinct screamed to turn around to drive until the roads ended, but another part of me, the part my mother had buried under that willow tree, was done running. I walked in. He was sitting at the dining table, his hands folded neatly in front of him, the same way he used to sit during Sunday dinner before announcing a punishment. His face looked calm, but his eyes were razor sharp. "You've been busy," he said. I didn't answer. I placed the envelope on the table between us. He glanced at it, then at me. "So he finally found you." The calmness in his voice chilled me more than any anger could have. "You knew he was alive," I said. He nodded once. "Of course. I've known for 30 years. He never stopped trying to crawl out of the grave I gave him." I felt the room tilt. The explosion, I whispered. "You—" "Yes," he said, before I could finish. "It was supposed to end that night. But your mother, she never understood how dangerous he was, how dangerous they both were together." I took a step back. He wasn't dangerous. He was my real father. Something flickered in his eyes, then pain maybe, or regret, though it vanished too quickly to be sure. "He was a fool," he said softly, "and fools ruin everything they touch." I reached for the envelope, but his hand shot out, pressing it flat on the table. "You don't want to read any more of that," he said. "You think you do, but you don't. You'll only destroy yourself." I pulled it back anyway. "No," I said quietly. "You already did that for me." He sighed and leaned back the chair, creaking beneath him. "Do you really think the world will believe him? Or that DNA test you found? Everything in those files can be discredited. You'll ruin your mother's memory, your brother's life, and for what? For a man who disappeared the moment things got hard. It's strange how manipulation works. It doesn't always sound cruel. Sometimes it sounds reasonable, even loving." But I'd learned to hear the truth behind his calm tone. He wasn't afraid of losing me. He was afraid of losing control. I said nothing. Instead, I opened the envelope and slid the letter across the table, the one my mother had written. He hesitated, then picked it up. His eyes scanned the page, and his jaw tightened. "She should have burned this," he murmured. "She couldn't," I said. "She still loved you." He looked up sharply, and for a second, I saw the man he used to be, the one who'd carried me on his shoulders at the fair, the one who taught me how to ride a bike. Then it was gone. "Love doesn't make people good," he said. "It just makes them dangerous in new ways." That was the last straw. I stood, grabbed the envelope, and said, "You can keep your version of love. I'm done with it." He didn't stop me when I walked out. Outside, the air was cool and sharp. The sun was starting to set, bleeding orange and violet across the horizon. I sat in my car shaking, watching the light fade. People say closure comes when you confront your demons, but that's not true. Closure comes when you finally accept that there's no explanation good enough. I drove straight to Daniel's apartment. He opened the door before I could knock, as if he'd been expecting me. His eyes were red. "Dad called," he said. "He told me everything." "Did he tell you why?" I asked. Daniel shook his head. "He doesn't need a reason. He's always been that way. You just didn't see it because you wanted to believe we were a family." "We were a family," I said softly. "Just not the kind I thought." He motioned for me to come in. His living room was dim, cluttered with unopened boxes and half-empty coffee cups. He sat down heavily on the couch. "What are you going to do?" I looked down at the key still hanging around my neck. I don't know. Part of me wants to burn it all. The papers, the truth, everything. Pretend none of this ever happened. And the other part wants to hand it all to the police and watch the world burn. He laughed bitterly. "You sound like Mom." That hurt more than he realized. "She wanted to protect us," I said. "She wanted to control us," he countered. "Just like him. She just did it with guilt instead of power." We sat in silence for a while, the kind that fills a room so completely it feels like another person. I thought about the old superstition my grandmother used to mutter, "Blood always remembers." I used to think it was about loyalty. Now I think it's about inevitability. Finally, I stood up. "I'm going back to the willow tree," I said. "I think that's where this ends." Daniel looked at me like I was walking into a storm. "If you dig any deeper, you might not come back from it." I smiled faintly. "Then maybe I'll finally meet the rest of me." The drive back to the house felt like retracing footsteps in a dream. The sky had gone dark by the time I reached the backyard. The willow swayed gently in the wind, its leaves whispering like it knew I was coming. I knelt where I'd found the tin box before. The soil was still loose, but something else caught my eye, fresh footprints. Someone had been here. Recently. I heard a soft rustle behind me. I turned, and for a split second, I saw a shadow, tall, still watching. My heart jumped. "Andrew," I whispered, but the figure didn't move. Then the faint beam of a flashlight flicked on, and I saw his face. It was Andrew, but pale, trembling. "I didn't want you to come back here," he said. "Why?" He took a step forward, the light shaking in his hand. "Because your father knows. He's not going to let you walk away this time." Before I could respond, a gunshot cracked through the night. The sound tore the air apart. Andrew staggered backward, eyes wide, and collapsed into the dirt. I dropped beside him, my hands slick with blood that didn't belong to me. From the shadows, a familiar voice said, "You should have stayed out of it, Hannah." I looked up and saw my father standing beneath the willow tree, the gun glinting in his hand. Time slowed. The sound of the gunshot was still echoing in my skull, but everything around me went silent. The rustling leaves, the distant crickets, even my own breath. My father stood perfectly still, illuminated by the pale porch light. The gun hung loosely at his side, smoke curling upward like a final exhale. I could taste metal in the air. Andrew wasn't moving. His head rested against the roots of the willow, his eyes half open, reflecting the trembling branches above us. My mind refused to accept what I was seeing. I pressed my hands against his chest, shaking him, whispering his name, begging for any sign of life. There was none. The key around my neck brushed against his shirt, cold against his skin. "Why?" My voice cracked. "Why did you do this?" My father didn't answer right away. He looked at Andrew's body with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Because he would have taken you," he said finally, his tone disturbingly calm. "He already took everything else from me." I stumbled to my feet, backing away. He was my father. He smiled faintly. "No, Hannah. I was your father. I raised you. I gave you everything. Don't cheapen that because of a piece of paper and a man who abandoned you before you could even walk." I shook my head, tears blurring the edges of everything. "You killed him." He stepped forward, the gun still in his hand, but lowered now, almost casual. "He was never supposed to come back. Your mother knew that. She made me promise to keep you safe. That's all I've ever done." I could barely hear him over the roaring in my ears. "Safe. You call this safe?" I gestured wildly, my voice trembling. "You lied to me my whole life. You made me believe we were a family when everything was built on death and deceit," he sighed. "Families are built on survival, Hannah. The rest is decoration." For a moment, he almost sounded like he believed it. Then his expression softened, and for the first time that night, I saw something break inside him. "You remind me of her," he whispered, "always looking for truth, even when it hurts everyone around you." I swallowed hard. "She wanted me to find this." "No," he said quietly. "She wanted you to forget." The words hit me harder than the gunshot. I didn't know what to believe anymore. I looked down at Andrew, then at the key around my neck, gleaming faintly under the moonlight. The thing that had started all of this, the object my mother had hidden so carefully, suddenly felt like a curse. "Put the gun down," I said, my voice shaking, but steady enough to sound like hers, like my mother's voice the night she used to calm our arguments. For a moment, he hesitated. Then he lowered it to his side. "You don't understand," he murmured. "Once people start digging into the past, they never stop. I couldn't let him ruin you like he ruined her." "You ruined her," I said quietly. "And now you've ruined me." He opened his mouth to speak, but a sudden light flashed across the yard, headlights sweeping over the grass. Tires screeched. Daniel's voice shouted from the driveway. "Dad, Hannah!" I turned, relief flooding me for half a second until I heard the click of the gun again. I spun back just as my father raised it, not at me this time, but at himself. "No," I screamed, lunging forward. But the sound came too fast, too final. The second gunshot shattered the night. He fell instantly. The silence that followed was unbearable. Daniel was yelling, running toward us, but I couldn't move. I knelt between the two bodies, the man who gave me life and the man who raised me, and felt a kind of emptiness I didn't know existed. Daniel dropped beside me, grabbing my shoulders. "Oh my God, Hannah, what did you do?" I looked at him dazed. "He shot Andrew, then himself." Daniel's face twisted with disbelief. He wouldn't. But when he saw the gun still clutched in our father's hand, the argument died on his tongue. He buried his face in his hands. I could hear him sobbing, quiet, angry, broken sounds that didn't belong to the brother I knew. We stayed there until the red and blue lights washed over the yard. The neighbors had called the police after hearing the gunshots. Officers swarmed the property, flashlights cutting through the dark voices, barking orders that barely reached me. One of them gently pulled me away, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and started asking questions. I couldn't answer any of them. The next few hours passed in a blur. Statements, ambulances, flashing lights, a detective's voice, calm but sharp, asking how long the conflict had been going on. All I could manage was, it started with a key. By dawn, the backyard was empty again. The bodies were gone. The willow stood silent, its leaves glistening with dew, its roots now tainted with everything we'd buried there. Truth, lies, and blood. Daniel sat beside me on the porch steps, staring at the ground. "They'll say it was murder-suicide," he said flatly. "Isn't that what it was?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "No, it was history repeating itself. Mom tried to bury it. Dad tried to end it. And now we're left to live with it." I didn't reply. There wasn't anything left to say. After a long silence, Daniel asked, "What will you do now?" I looked down at the key in my hand. It was smeared with dirt and dried blood, the ribbon long gone. For a moment, I thought about throwing it into the river, letting it sink with everything else. But something in me hesitated. "I don't know," I said finally. "Maybe I'll keep it as a reminder of what. That truth always costs something." He nodded, his eyes red but calm now. "You should sell the house," he said quietly. "Leave all of this behind." I glanced at the willow tree one last time. "I don't think I'll ever leave it behind," I whispered. "People still debate whether forgiveness is an act of mercy or survival." That morning, watching the sunrise over the house where everything fell apart, I realized it's both. You forgive, not because they deserve it, but because you can't carry the weight forever. As the light spread through the yard, I closed my eyes and whispered a small prayer, not for them, but for myself, for the child who never knew her real name, for the woman who finally did. When I opened my eyes again, the key felt lighter in my hand, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what it could open next. Weeks passed, but the house never really went quiet again. Even after the police packed up their tape, after the last neighbor stopped pretending to check in, the silence felt alive, too dense, too aware. I moved through it like a ghost, noticing every groan of the walls, every breath of the old pipes. It was strange how once everyone was gone, the house seemed to exhale as if it had been waiting for the truth, too. I thought about leaving, selling it like Daniel suggested, but I couldn't. The house held too much of my mother. The smell of her lavender perfume still lingered in the hallway, faint but stubborn. Her mug was still on the shelf, a thin ring of tea dried inside. Every object was an echo. Every memory had a shadow. The police ruled it a murder-suicide, just as Daniel predicted. There were no further investigations, no headlines, no justice, just a quiet, tragic ending in a quiet suburban neighborhood. People always say families break apart, slowly cracks forming over years until one day the whole thing collapses. Ours collapsed all at once with 2 gunshots under a willow tree. Daniel stopped calling. I think he couldn't stand to talk to me without seeing their ghosts standing between us. I couldn't blame him. We were both orphans now, but not in the way children are. We'd been orphaned by truth. Some nights I sat in my mother's old chair by the window holding the key. It had lost its shine, but it still hummed with something, maybe memory, maybe guilt. I wondered if objects could mourn too. I even looked it up once. Apparently, some cultures believe sentimental items absorb the energy of their owners. My mother's key, hidden beneath the floorboard for decades, had soaked in everything she never said. Maybe that's why it found its way back to me. One night around midnight, I heard something unusual, a soft tapping sound coming from the living room. At first I thought it was the wind, but it came again rhythmic and deliberate. I followed it, heart pounding. The sound led me to the old dresser, the same one I'd opened months ago when this all began. The drawer that once hid the letters was slightly ajar. I hesitated, then pulled it open. Inside was a single envelope. No ribbon, no dust. Fresh paper. My name written neatly across the front. I froze. For a long time, I couldn't move. The handwriting wasn't my mother's, and it wasn't Andrew's. But I recognized it immediately. It was my father's. My first instinct was to throw it away, but curiosity is stronger than grief. I tore it open. Inside was a letter short and terrifyingly calm, Hannah. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to understand. What happened that night, both nights, wasn't about anger. It was about ending a story that should have stayed buried. I spent my life trying to protect you from my mistakes, from your mother's choices, from Andrew's greed. I failed. Maybe now you can start over. The key was never meant for a door. It was meant for you. Whatever you do, don't hate us. That's how the curse begins. I read it 3 times. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The curse. I didn't believe in curses. Not until that moment, because suddenly I realized how every generation in this family had done the same thing, lied to protect someone killed, to protect something buried what they couldn't bear to face. It was a cycle, an inheritance of silence. And I was next in line. I sat there until the sun came up, watching light spill across the letter as if the dawn itself wanted to read it too. Later that morning, I went out to the backyard. The willow stood still heavy with morning dew. The ground beneath it was newly seeded. The police had turned up the soil during their investigation. But one small patch near the roots was still uneven, as if something rested just below the surface. I knelt and brushed away the dirt. My fingers hit something solid wood. Another box, smaller than the last. My heart stopped. I hesitated, then pried it open. Inside were 2 items, a small silver locket and a folded photograph. The locket was engraved with the initials HCS, Hannah Carter Sloan. My full name. Not the one I was given, but the one I was meant to have. The photo was of my parents, all 3 of them. My mother, my father, and Andrew. They were young, standing together beside that same willow tree, smiling. For a second, I couldn't comprehend it. They weren't enemies in this photo. They were together. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, was a single line before the lies. I don't remember crying. I just remember laughing, a strange, broken laugh that startled the birds out of the trees. People still debate whether truth can ever heal what it destroys. I think my mother knew the answer. That's why she left me the key not to open a door, but to open the wound that never closed. That evening, I locked everything, the letters, the locket, the photograph, inside a metal box and buried it beneath the willow again. But this time I marked the spot with a small stone. A reminder, not a hiding place. When Daniel came by days later, we didn't talk about it. He stood beside me under the tree, silent. After a while, he said, "Do you think we're cursed?" I looked at the willow swaying gently in the breeze. "No," I said quietly. I think we're finally free." He nodded, then left without another word. That night, I lit a single candle in the living room, one of the few things that still worked after all the chaos. Its flame flickered against the window, casting long shadows across the walls. For the first time in months, I didn't feel haunted. I just felt still. I whispered a small goodbye to the house, to my mother, to the ghosts that lingered between the floorboards. Then I placed the brass key beside the candle and watched as its reflection danced in the glass. The key had done its job. It had opened everything it needed to, and for once, there was nothing left to unlock. The night after I buried the last box, the air turned colder. Maybe it was just the weather changing, or maybe the house was finally ready to rest. I packed slowly, one drawer at a time, folding memories into cardboard. I didn't take much. Just my mother's willow brooch, the photograph, and the key. The rest could stay here where the ghosts belonged. Every creak of the floor felt like a farewell whisper. The house that had watched me grow, break, and rebuild myself was finally ready to breathe again. When I stepped outside, the dawn was pale and silver. The willow tree stood still, the soil beneath it smooth and calm. It looked peaceful for once, no longer burdened by secrets. I pressed my hand to its trunk, feeling the cool bark under my palm. "It's done," I whispered. The wind picked up gently, rustling the leaves like a quiet answer. I moved into a small apartment near the edge of town, above a cafe that always smelled of fresh bread. The first morning there, I sat by the window with a cup of coffee and tried to imagine what an ordinary day might feel like. But ordinary isn't something you get back after something like this. Ordinary is for people who never had to question the name on their own birth certificate. Sometimes I catch myself talking to my mother out loud. It's strange how grief changes form. It doesn't vanish. It just rearranges itself into new habits. "You'd like this place," I tell her sometimes. "It's quiet. No secrets under the floorboards." Then I'll laugh softly to myself because she'd probably say, "No secrets just means you haven't looked hard enough yet." A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, no sender's name, just my own handwritten across the front in black ink. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. It read, "Hannah, your mother wasn't wrong. The truth does set you free, but freedom is heavier than chains. Carry it carefully." There was no signature. I didn't need one. The handwriting was Andrew's. He'd written it long before that night, maybe months, maybe years. It must have been among his things, delayed, forgotten, then finally delivered by someone who never knew what it meant. I sat for a long time staring at it until the words blurred into shapes. Freedom is heavier than chains. He was right. After that, I stopped trying to separate guilt from peace. They were tangled now like roots beneath the willow. I began volunteering at a local historical archive, ironic maybe, for someone who once tried to bury her own family's past. Cataloging the lives of strangers gave me perspective. People leave pieces of themselves behind everywhere. Letters, photographs, recipes, receipts, and those fragments, no matter how small, always tell the truth eventually. One afternoon, while sorting through an old collection of town records, I found something that made me freeze a property record from 1995 signed by M. Sloan. My mother's signature, using the surname she'd sworn to erase. A single document linking the lives she'd tried to keep apart. I smiled, not in shock, not even in sadness, but in recognition. The past never dies. It just waits patiently until you're strong enough to look it in the eye. That night, I took the key out again. It was tarnished now, the red ribbon long replaced by a thin silver chain. I hung it on the wall above my desk, not as a relic, but as a reminder. Every story, no matter how painful, deserves to be unlocked. People still debate whether blood defines family. I used to think it did. Now I know better. Family isn't just who you're born to. It's who stands beside you when the truth comes out and the world falls apart. Daniel and I talk again slowly, carefully. Some days we laugh about childhood memories. Other days we sit in silence, both knowing that silence is the only language that still fits. Last week, I went back to the old house one last time. It was empty, waiting for the new owners. I walked through each room, tracing the outlines of old furniture on the floor. The air was still and dustless, as if time itself had paused to let me say goodbye. Before I left, I walked to the willow tree. The grass had grown over the disturbed soil green and soft again. I placed a small stone at its base, the same kind my mother used to collect on beach trips. "This is for you," I said softly. "For all of you." The breeze shifted gentle and warm, curling around me like an embrace. For the first time, I didn't feel haunted. I felt seen. I know now that the key didn't open a door. It opened me. It forced me to face every truth I'd inherited and every lie I'd lived. And in doing so, it gave me something my family never had: peace. Not the quiet kind that hides, but the kind that stays even when the past whispers your name. So if you ever find a key hidden somewhere, it shouldn't be "don't be afraid." Maybe it's not a lock it's meant for. Maybe it's a story. Maybe it's your story waiting for you to turn it and listen. And if you do, just remember, some doors don't close again once they're opened. But sometimes that's the only way the light gets in. So that's it, friends. That's where my story ends tonight. I don't know if it was fate or punishment or just the randomness of life that led me to that key, but it changed everything. If you've ever wondered what would happen if you dug too deep into your own family history, take it from me. Some truths will break you first and rebuild you later. Both parts are necessary. I still wear the key sometimes. People ask about it, and I just smile and say, "It opened more than a door." They never quite understand what I mean, and that's okay. Not every truth needs an audience. Some just need to be carried quietly like a heartbeat. To those of you who've stayed with me through this story, thank you. Maybe you saw a piece of your own life in mine, or maybe you're just braver than you think for listening this far. Either way, I'm grateful you're here. So wherever you are, your living room, your car, your bed with the lights turned low, take a deep breath. Let it out. You made it through this story, and that means something. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for that soothing hum, and close your eyes. Let the night settle around you. The world's quieter when you stop fighting its noise. Good night, my friends, and remember, every secret has its own way of finding the light.